Alrighty, in this video, what we're going to be talking about is how to do production builds with Require.js. So what we've seen already is a perfectly fine example of working with Require.js in a development environment. So we have a Gulp task that is watching our source JavaScript files, and every time we make a change, it goes out and tells Babel to compile it and turn it into JavaScript code that is understood by the browser. And then we have the Require.js runtime going out and grabbing files as they're being required from other modules, and everyone's happy and everything's awesome. And this is a great development workflow because it's fast, it's easy, doesn't require a whole lot of configuration. But it is going to be a production nightmare. The reason for that is generally speaking, as I said this before earlier in the series, you really want your modules to be small and self-contained and only do one thing. So you really want, you're going to end up with a bunch of files, a bunch of modules. And every single one of those modules is another HTTP request that Require has to perform in order to grab that module from your site, from your web server. So how do we fix this? How do we fix this overhead and get rid of it? Well, Require.js comes with an optimizer, and I have the documentation open right here for that, and you're welcome to go through it and look at all the awesome stuff in it. I'm only going to be talking about the options that are going to be needed for 99% of the use cases of this optimizer. Now, running this optimizer, you can either run it using Java, or you can run it using Node as a little script, or you can include it right into a Node application and actually perform the transformation there. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be using the Gulp RequireJS Optimize plugin, which will bring in the RequireJS Optimizer along with this plugin into our project. And then we're going to write a Gulp file to do our production builds. So basically the steps are going to be as follows. We do our existing development build first to generate all of our script files, and then we run it through the Gulp RequireJS Optimize, which in turn runs it through the RequireJS Optimizer, and then we get our bundles out. And then for production, we can just include those bundles, however many bundles we want. We'll talk a little bit later about how we can change how many bundles we're going to be using. And then in production, we'd simply require in those bundles, significantly reducing the amount of HTTP requests need to be made in order to run your application. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to move that out of the way, and I'll go ahead and pop open my command line, and I'm going to say npm install gulp require.js optimize save dev. Make sure you do the save dev there, because otherwise it won't be picked up by gulp load plugins. I'm going to wait there for a second. Okay, so we have that loaded. Then I'm going to jump into the Gulp file, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write a nice little config option so we can easily see what's being compiled and what isn't. So I'll go ahead and say const config equals object, and then inside of that I'll have a scripts object. Scripts. And inside of that I'll have a prod object. And inside of that, I'm going to have my source, and I'm going to do an array. And what's the source going to be? Well, these are going to be the modules, the JavaScript files that are sent into the Require.js Optimizer. And what file do we want to send in? Well, we want to send in the root of our application. We want to send in the thing that we're going to be requiring. And what's going to be awesome about our the Require.js Optimizer is if we handed it, for example, Application.js, it's going to go ahead and load in all of the required dependencies and include that in the bundle for us. However, we're not going to be passing in source scripts Application.js. Instead, we're going to be passing in public scripts Application.js. And I'll go ahead and, well, let's leave bad in for now. Okay, so jumping back to the Gulp file, I'm going to pass in public scripts Application.js. Again, the reason I'm doing this is we want to tell Require the compiled file after it's been processed by Babel for our source. Also, we need to make sure that we pass it into a file that has access to our lib files that we've configured in our Require.js config so that the optimizer can go out and actually load up jQuery and Lodash and all that fun stuff. All right, next up we need our dest. Our dest is going to be public build. So we're going to dump all of our bundles into public build. And then I'm going to do another one called require. Now, this object is going to be what we're going to pass in directly into the RequireJS optimizer. So you can use whatever options are available in the RequireJS optimizer here. You can go look at the documentation to find out more. The one I'm concerned about is the main config file. So make sure you spell that correctly, because this is a property on the actual RequireJS config. And what we do is we pass in public config.js. So we pass in the config file that contains a RequireJS.config call. So again, that's why we separated this out into its own file, so that the builder, the optimizer, gets access to all of our configuration, and we don't have to repeat it, because that would be gross and nasty and horrible, and everything will be awful. Because then we would have to repeat ourselves every time we change the configuration or added a shim or whatever, something like that. All right, so now let's go ahead and create our prod scripts task. I'm simply going to do gulp task prod scripts. I'm going to pass in gulp series, and then in gulp series, the first thing I'm going to do is dev scripts, followed by function bundle. And so what this will do is this will execute our dev scripts, making sure that all of our scripts have been dumped into the public scripts folder. And then the bundle, I'm actually going to have run through RequireJS. So I'm going to say return gulp.source, and I'm going to pass in our config scripts prod source, and then I'm going to pipe it into money.require.js optimize. Now, again, we're using the Gulp load plugins plugin, so the plugin that we're wanting to load is RequireJS optimize, but to use this with the Gulp load plugins, we have to capitalize the O and remove the dash. And then I'm going to go ahead and say pipe gulp dest and pass in config scripts prod dest. All right, let's go ahead and open up our command line window, and I'm simply going to say gulp prod scripts. So the first thing it's going to do is compile all of our scripts using Babel, and then it's going to throw a exception. And the reason it's throwing exception is because I depend on dev scripts, but that appears lower than this prod scripts. This is something I'm still getting used to from transitioning from Gulp 3 to Gulp 4, but we're going to want to make sure that we define our dev scripts before we run our prod scripts. So I'm just going to put this down here, right underneath dev scripts. I would actually want to put this down all the way at the bottom of the file, but the reason I'm not doing that is because I want the config and the prod scripts to be next to each other. I could also have done something like this. I could go and take all of my dev scripts, grab all of this, and cut it, and change this to dev scripts, which is going to be a function that I'll create down here, and say function dev scripts, and paste it in there. That's another organization pattern that we can use using Gulp 4. And that allows me to have a little bit more room so I can see prod scripts and my config on the same screen. The point is, though, is dev scripts has to be defined before we access it from prod scripts. So let's go ahead and run this. So we see our prod scripts is running, our dev scripts is running, and it looks like we have an error. Dest.on is not a function. So it looks like what's going on here is I used an array here for some reason. I don't know why I did that. Sometimes I do crazy things like that. But you don't want to do that. You want your dest to be a string. Come on. Whoops. Gulp.dest. Blah, blah, blah. In addition, the RequireJS optimize is a method. I don't know how I missed that as well. So we'll pass in config scripts prod require. So we pass in the RequireJS configuration we want to use to the RequireJS optimize plugin. So now that we have that fixed, hopefully I didn't fail in other places. Okay, check that out. Already we have optimizing Application.js. Now, quick note, this will take a while. This can take a decent amount of time, because what it's going to do is it's going to grab that module that we requested to be bundled. It's going to find all of its dependencies. It's going to load all of their dependencies. It's then going to concatenate them into a single file, and then it's going to print them out. So if we go ahead and jump over to public build, we now have this Application.js, and as we can see, we have minified code. So we have everything. We have Lodash, we have jQuery, we have jQuery UI. If I scroll down to the bottom, we see we have our own custom code. So that is super exciting. We have all of our awesome minified code. So how do we use this? Well, in index.html, I'm going to go ahead and delete this code. I'm going to say RequireJS. And I'm going to pull in, just take care of that. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull in our bundle after we pull in config. So I'm going to pass in, or we shouldn't even need our config. So I'm going to go ahead and pass in build Application.js, which is our bundle. And then I'm going to say RequireJS. And I'm going to pass in something unfortunate. I'm going to pass in Application.js. And I'll talk about that in a second. Now let's hop over here and hit refresh. And we see our application. So we don't need our config. All we need is our bundle and the RequireJS runtime. So grab the runtime, grab our bundle, and then we can require in our module. Now, unfortunately, there seems to be a bug in our in the Gulp plugin that results in Application.js being the module name. So we can actually see if we search for Application.js, that is the module name that's being loaded. If I had instead done application, it wouldn't have worked. Seems to be a bug, not that big of a deal. Again, most of the time you do not want the JS, but in this case, I couldn't get around it, so I just went ahead and just accepted my fate and used application.js directly. So in production, you're going to want to add JS to the end of your entry point module because that's how this plugin is deciding to print that out. So again, just to recap, here's our production scripts. And here would be our development. So our development, what we would do is we would bring in require, we would bring in config, and then we would script out RequireJS, and we would pass in Application.js. So basically the difference here is when you're in development, you'll want this. When you're in production, do that. So using whatever templating engine you have, PHP or ERB or Razor or Jade or whatever, you would just say, if we're in the production environment, load in our awesome bundle. If not, don't load in our bundle. This should just be application, but load in our config instead. So I'll go ahead and comment out our dev there. All right, what if we wanted multiple modules? So let's say in my source, I'm going to delete that script completely. I don't want you anymore. And then I'm going to create a new top-level script. And let's say we have a contact page. So we have two pages, our main application page and a contact page, and both of them have scripts in them. So we'll do contact.js. Contact will import underscore from Lodash and import money from jQuery. And then he'll say something like const array equals 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we'll say Lodash each array item goes into, I don't know, span span, and then dot append to, and we'll pass that into body. So we have this really bizarre contact page here, but it'll serve our purposes. Basically what I'm saying is each one of these top-level scripts I want to turn into their own production modules. So let's create the corresponding HTML page for this. I'm going to hop over into public and then index, and I'm just going to copy and paste it. And then I'm going to go into dev mode. I'll stay on prod mode for this. And my index1.html, I'm going to rename to contact.html. And the only changes I'm going to make is I'm going to add an h1 contact. I'm going to take off, we'll load up our site.css, but we'll take off our jQuery UI CSS. And then instead of requiring JS contact or application.js, I'll require in contact.js. Now, if I was in development, I would use this one, and I would change this to contact. Let's just go ahead and test that real fast. I'm going to go ahead and run a gulp dev scripts, and that'll compile my contact.js file. So now under scripts, we now have this this contact.js file here. And then let's go ahead and open up our browser, refresh, and head over to contact.html. And we see contact, and then we see 1, 2, 3, 4 added in. If we look at our network, we see that jQuery and Lodash and contact.js was all pulled in. All right, so now how would we produce a secondary bundle for this? So I'm going to remove this and go back into production mode. And let's go ahead and hop over into our gulp file. The way we would do this is we would simply pass in another source. So let's add in contact.js. And now let's come back here into this, and let's do gulp prod scripts. And I'm going to go ahead and pause the video while it's doing this, because this is going to take a moment. All right, now that it's done, let's just verify that it works. I'm going to hop over into my page. I'm going to hit refresh, and contact.js was not loaded. If I open up build, contact.js is there. I think that what happened is I am still loading the application bundle. I'm not loading the contact bundle. So let's change that over to load the contact bundle instead. So that was my bad. If I load this, check this out. We have 2 JavaScript files being included, RequireJS and contact.js. But I have proof right here that Lodash and jQuery got included into the bundle. And if you're interested, you could always hop into your build and see what got included. So in this case, I got jQuery and I got underscore, and then I got my own module. So yeah, what if we wanted to make this just a little bit easier? So let's say we have a bunch of these pages. Well, what I can do here is inside of my Gulp file, I can change this to actually glob all of the top level JavaScript files and treat each one as an individual page. And that's simply by doing that. So we change our source to public scripts and then a placeholder .js. So now if I open up source and scripts, and let's go ahead and add an about.js, and this imports Lodash, and we just do each and then nothing. I just want to make sure we use this import so it doesn't get optimized out. And then we could do the same thing with something like, I don't know, cart.js. So now we have a bunch of these top-level scripts, and if I went and I ran the production scripts, I will go ahead and pause while this works. We now get all of these bundles brought in. Now, we did get some other modules we didn't care about. Remember how I manually added bad and bad plugin to our scripts folder? If you didn't do that, they wouldn't have appeared. Remember, we're globbing on the public scripts folder, our build folder. We're not globbing on our source scripts folder. But now if I open up build, and make sure I do a refresh so we can see all of our build files. If I click on About, notice how we have Lodash implemented here, and at the end we have our custom module. We also have bad and bad plugin as well that were brought in, and carts and all that fun stuff. So that's how we can go about, if we have bunch of these individual pages, how we can create individual bundles. All right, so we have a problem. And that problem is there's a lot of repeated stuff in here. So in the next video, I'm going to show you guys how we can pull out our vendor scripts into their own bundles so that our custom bundles don't have to repeatedly declare our vendor scripts such as jQuery, jQuery UI, and Lodash. And we'll see you guys then.